Hello? Wow, this makes me loud. Okay, let's figure out where the volume is good so you can hear me and I don't blast out any speakers. My name's Tonya Woldridge. I am with Paizo. I am their organized play manager. I've been in that position now for 3-ish years. It's a little over 3, not quite 4 yet. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the history of Paizo, some of the lessons we learned when we were making Pathfinder, and where we are going with Pathfinder 2nd Edition, or what did we do for Pathfinder Classic, and what is Pathfinder Future. I will give a little bit of history, take you in a Wayback Machine with me. Some of this I actually got to live through. Before I became a Paizo employee, I was part of the organized play venture officer ranks. So I kind of came in from a player and worked my way up and then got the job out in Seattle. But then I'd like to take some questions from you and kind of steer this where you want to. So that's why I'm down here, because this is a conversation. I really hate feeling like I'm up on the side, behind all of the microphones. Not how I like to do this. So let's have a chat for an hour and see where we go. Wayback Machine, back to 2002. At that point in time, Lisa had worked for several gaming companies, including White Wolf, Wizards of the Coast. She also had friends in TSR, which was the origins of Dungeons and Dragons. So she had been in the industry for a number of years and had been recently doing Star Wars stuff for WotC when she found herself out of a job and just kind of cruising, looking for something to do. At that time, her partner, Vic Wirtz, was as well kind of cruising, looking, and they said, hey, WotC friends, if anything ever comes up in the industry, let us know what's going on. And one of their friends named Johnny Wilson got a hold of him and said, hey, WotC doesn't want to produce magazines anymore. They've got this license for Dungeons and Dragons magazines, but they're kind of done with the periodicals. Interested? And Lisa went, well, I've not done magazines yet per se, so let's see what we can do. Talked over it a little bit more, and in 2002 they formed the entity that was Paizo Publishing, with Vic, Lisa, and Johnny being the original 3 partners in it. It was a year of kind of taking stock of what these 2 licenses meant, because for some people they had been reading Dragon and Dungeon for years, and there were some things they liked and some things they didn't like, but really what did the gaming community want out of those magazines? And how could they do that to support WotC's own Dungeons and Dragons licenses? And they did some revamps, and they brought some staff on, including Eric Mona. Now, I was like, wow, you've been here forever. That was my big moment there. 2002 was a good year. They also had a 3rd magazine, Star Wars Insider. And that really was where most of Paizo's initial income came from, was from the Star Wars side of it, the Lucasfilm side of it. Side trivia, Lisa and Vic are both avid Star Wars collectors. I have heard of their collection. One day I hope to go see it. But they, really that's what they got into this for. Dungeons and Dragons were side pieces. When they had approximately 20 employees when they made the split. To give you a comparison, we're now up to 76. I think we just hired 77 over the Christmas holiday. So in 15 years, pretty phenomenal growth for a small industry publisher. In 2003, they decided on the Adventure Path format to go into these magazines. It was the first time that there had been a concerted, ongoing adventure over multiple copies of a magazine. Before that, it had always been a one-off here, a one-off there, built for the current edition of D&D. But this time they said, let's see what happens if we take characters from 1 to 20. Will this sell? Will people like it? And GMs were like, well, yeah, because that means we've got the basis, we've got a framework, and now we can turn in and start adding our bits to it, but it saves us so much prep work to have that. And it came off. And Shackled City sold wonderful. But they got some bad news that year as well. Lucasfilm had decided they had done so well revamping the Star Wars Fan Club and Star Wars Insider magazines that they wanted them back. And thus being the problem with licenses, at any time when that license expires, they have the rights to revoke contracts. So Johnny had decided to leave Paizo. He left the partnership and was bought out. And in return, Lucasfilm said, hey, this is a good time. We're going to take this back and leave you with only 2. Vic and Lisa kind of went, okay, well, where does that leave us? How do we make up the gap in our income stream? And they started looking for ways that they could augment Dungeon and Dragon subscriptions. And being 2003, the internet was there, but it wasn't as robust as it is now. Web stores hadn't really been developed. So they said, well, we'll write our own software, and we'll bring in what we need, and we'll start sourcing solutions to this problem. And so they got a tech department started at Paizo that started building them in-house software. And they tried to relaunch the Amazing Stories and a magazine known as Undefeated, and it was for competitive games, especially card games. Both of those were shorter-lived endeavors, and they ended by the end of 2004. They weren't doing what they wanted to do. So they kind of said, okay, well, let's put up shop and let's look at something else. 2005 was a year of massive change. We had announcements that they needed to diversify, and they knew it. They needed to do it quick, or what we knew as Paizo was going to go away. So they started looking for several key things. They wanted to start being distributors for other games. And especially with the open gaming licenses coming out, there were a lot of people wanting to get into that game market that just didn't have the reach that WotC and Paizo had. And so they wanted to get those third parties out there. They wanted to use the web store to sell more products because, again, they had the technology and they could leverage it for people. They wanted to look at doing other D&D products that weren't Dungeon and Dragon, but could still be covered by that license that they held. They wanted to look for generic game accessories. Again, when listening to the community, they said, oh, it would be really nice if we had some maps that we could just open up and use. Because, drawing them out on these, pieces of paper, or drawing the grids out, or having to erase everything and then redoing it, it's just too time-consuming. This is not what we have time for anymore. How about some miniatures? We'd like more miniatures, because, miniatures had done the wargaming side, but hadn't really made the jump into tabletop RPGs. Anything else that we could add that would give that ambiance, that would give that little special something when you sit down at your table? Let's see if we can find some of those to produce. And they wanted to make sure that magazines weren't their only holding, because in 2005, we had started turning to the internet for news. And they could see at some point in the future that magazines, print magazines especially, were not going to be the way to go. So they launched the Shackled City hardcover. And it's the first time that they took all their pieces, I think they had spread it over a year and a half of magazines, and so they pulled them all together. The first few had been written under 3.0, so they updated them for 3.5, added a little bit of new content, issued it for Gen Con, and it sold. And they went, ooh, we might be onto something, haha. They also started making licenses with Reaper and with other companies to produce things for them. The Game Mastery brand of gaming articles was born. You had the metal templates, the flipped mats, and the mat packs, all generated out of 2005, and the community saying, this is what we want. So we get to 2006, and we've got Savage Tide coming out, and it's the next adventure path they decided to do, but there's a just wee bit of a snafu in this one. Because WotC comes and says, we've got a 4th edition coming out. And we'll share some things with you, but we're not quite ready yet. And so Paizo was like, okay, well, we need to produce this next adventure path. Wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. But in this interim of waiting, they had to make a decision. Do we write something for a new edition that the writers don't know what they're writing for, the players don't know what they're playing, or do we stay with 3.5? And again, they turned to the community and they asked for some feedback, and at this time the message boards had been spun up and they had all sorts of ways of gathering information, and they made a really high diplomacy roll and heard that no, we would like you to stay with the current edition. What's coming out, we don't know. People weren't sure if they wanted to make that jump. And so the Paizo made the decision to write Savage Tide in a 3.5 format. But they also knew that when WotC comes out with a new edition, they tend to take the old edition out of print. And you don't want to write an adventure path for a game that does not have a core rule book. And so they said, how are we going to solve this problem? Looking back at the open gaming license again, there was enough in there that Jason Bowman had started playing around with his house rules. They were things that he had made notes and said, if I got to tweak this, what would I do? Well, maybe I'd look at the grapple rules. They're kind of unclear. Not sure we got that one right yet. Just saying. Let's look at some other things. Is the skill system as robust as we want it to be? Or there's all these extra skills. Could we combine a few of them? What about character creation? Is there a way to streamline that? What would our players like? What would I like as a GM? What would my players like? And then what would the community like in this game? And the decision was made in October, November-ish, that they would go ahead and write a new rule set based on 3.5 under the open gaming license. So, as we like to do, I swear we all know what our deadlines are, and then we know how close we need to get to them. Between November and March of the next year, they managed to make those changes to the existing rule set and put them in an alpha form that people could play. And on March 18th, they released the alpha test of Pathfinder, which if you ever visit Paizo.com and if you Google Auntie Lisa's Story Hour, what I'm giving you here is a very small snippet of what she put up for the 10th anniversary. And there's a list of potential names that we could have called our game. And it was a very interesting, it was like sorcery swords, or tree paths, and I guess it took them almost 3 different meetings of sitting down and brainstorming all these words and then sitting there and talking about them and putting them together. And I don't get to spend a lot of time in brainstorm meetings when I'm at the office, but when I do, just listening to people throwing out ideas, rapid fire, is one of the most amazing things, and I'm in awe of my coworkers that work on the creative side, because they come up with just topics and things that I'm like, I never would have thought of that. But out of that list and 3 hours of meetings came the term Pathfinder. And it's been our brand flagship since then. At that time, we decided that Game Mastery, while a nice name, if we're going to publish, let's publish under our major brand. And so everything that was Game Mastery got a complete logo overhaul and revamp and was released the next year as Pathfinder. So Pathfinder flip tiles, Pathfinder flip mats, Pathfinder map packs, Pathfinder item cards, Pathfinder accessories. Everything came with the one logo. We also had started working with Cheap Ass Games to produce some of their board games under the Titanic label, where they had done them with the minimal pieces available. We started producing them with full boards, color pieces, extra bits. And so we came out with the line of Kill Dr. Lucky, Save Dr. Lucky, and some of the other board games. In 2007, knowing that they were going to write the new rule set, they still needed to deal with the fact that WotC had decided to go away from having Dungeon and Dragon magazine. And they decided, okay, well, we've got all these subscribers and they've paid us money, and what are we gonna do? Because we don't really want to refund it. That would be awkward. But we know we need to give them some value for what they have. So they gave them an option. You can have some store credit at our web store. You can get your cash refund, or you can trust us that we're gonna write a quality product and just buy into our first adventure path that we're going to write under our new rule system. And overwhelmingly, 66% of the subscribers that were there in 2007 said we will sign on for Rise of the Rune Lords. To date, it is still the most popular adventure path that Paizo has ever published. Kingmaker has come close. So in doing that, they had made a lot of changes and a lot of innovations to Dungeons and Dragons in those years on how to present information, on what people wanted in their pictures, on the artwork styles, on what an adventure path needed to have. But they wanted to make one more major change. When they lifted them from the magazines, they wanted beautiful, glossy books with very high-quality art. And they wanted them to be something that not only was used by the GMs, but then could be just admired for a book's sake. And if you leave it out and someone starts flipping through it, they go, ooh, this is kind of cool. What you do here? Can we join? And so it went to a 96-page format, which was the size of the magazines currently. But it was 100% done with art and color, which made their production values some of the highest in the industry. And those are production values that we still continue with today. 2007 also saw something else new and innovative. I think we had watched too much reality television by then, because the idea of, well, if you've got Survivor off of an island, and you've got The Amazing Race, and you've got all these, what would happen if you do something like that for role-playing games? And RPG Superstar was born. And it had 3 judges the first year, and 1,000 entries. From that, we guaranteed a paid writing job to the first place winner, but we normally picked up the first 6 to 10 authors in some form as our writing pool. It was a way for us to find writing talent that we knew met a certain level of our production values. We did it for, I believe, 6 years before the time burden on the staff just became too much and we couldn't dedicate those kind of resources anymore. And it's something that still every once in a while gets kicked around as, is this the year that we're gonna bring it back? So I don't know if you watch, I can't guarantee anything, but we may see the return to RPG Superstar because we found some of our strongest, longest term writers out of that. So in 2008, March, we launched the beta, their alpha test. At Gen Con, we launched the beta, and we did something that no company had done before then. We made it a free game to play. We said, take our rules, break our rules, tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like, because in the end, if we don't make a game you guys want to play, we're not going to succeed. We need our players, our fans, to be there with us every step of the way. And then we said, but you know, because we have publishing contacts, we can leverage and get you a printed book cheaper than you can go down to Staples or FedEx and get it printed yourself. So if you want those paper rules, if you're the kind of person that needs to feel something in your hand when you're reading and you want to highlight the heck out of everything, we'll sell you one too, because you know, we will. The first plan, one of the other big departures when they started making P1 and that really innovated things was you had always had to have 3 books. You had to have your player's guide, you had to have your GM's guide because it had all the items, so even players wound up buying GM's guides. And you needed your monster manual or your book of foes. And we looked at it and said, why are we asking players to buy something that is essentially a GM tool? This doesn't make a lot of sense to us as a production mechanic. So we went ahead and said, no, we're going to put everything the players need into the core rulebook. We'll come up with GM stuff later, but at this point in time, you've got the core rulebook and you've got what we call the bestiary or the book of foes, and those were the only 2 books. GMs needed one, players needed one. You can open it and just head down the road. The other piece of information that they had to decide at that time was how faithful do we stay to 3.5? We have a lot of changes. Some of them make absolute sense. They just kind of flow out of the idea of 3.5 into Pathfinder. But some of them were a little farther out there and were more of, would this work? And at the time, because of what they were doing and how they were doing it, the decision was made to stay closer to the 3.5 model and to keep things familiar because they weren't established and they wanted to make sure people knew what they were doing and how they wanted to do it. So we get to 2008, everyone gets to Gen Con, there's stress, there's tension, they're not quite sure what's gonna happen. And they launch the beta playtest and it goes over gangbusters. And the feedback is tremendous. And Jason and his team of designers spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours reading forums. And more hours. and more hours. And, you know, anywhere they could gather 5 minutes, they were back on the message boards trying to get feedback. All of that came into the game. Some of it in different ways than the players expected, some of it in the different ways than the designers expected. They have an idea in their heads, but it's not always where it's going to go. Sometimes these things get a life of their own and they just take off into the yonder. So 2009 was the launch of the actual core rulebook. 2010 started adding 3 more hardbacks. We wanted to find a balance between giving enough information to keep the players that wanted to play all the time happy, that they had new toys to play with, and not saturate the people that only played once in a while, because there's a very easy to overwhelm. And we wanted it to make it to a point that, you know, when you come in and you see a stack of books this big, and someone says, hey, you want to play? It's like, yeah, that's not too bad. I can read a couple of those. When you come in and see a stack of books this big and say, hey, you want to play? No, I'll pass, thank you. You know, where's the Monopoly set? I'm going to step back and go for something I know, something that's familiar. So every year that we've added books, we've been very cognizant of how big that stack is getting and how much more you need to know now than you needed to know when we launched. And that, again, played into some of the decisions on our second edition. 2011 saw Paizo outsell D&D for the first year ever. And it kind of took everyone by surprise, because all we wanted was a game that people wanted to play and something that would keep the team afloat and give them a chance to continue writing. But with it brought some expectations, and with it brought some decisions internally that we needed to make. And one of those decisions that was made probably before then, subconsciously, but actually started going into practice in 11, 12, 13, and 14, was that we wanted to be leaders for diversity and leaders for inclusivity. And we, as a company, decided we wanted our players to each be able to see themselves in the game somewhere and fit into the world somewhere. So we kind of wind up with a kitchen sink of iconics. If you read some of their backstories, they're absolutely fascinating. I'm still learning things about them, and I've been playing Pathfinder since 2009. No, 8. I guess I did play in the beta. But we also wanted to make sure that our world was reflective of that. So you've got the horror nations in Ustalav, and you've got the very much fantasy nation in Varissia, and you've got, you know, the tech nations in Numeria. And every time that we fleshed out a part of our world, we wanted to make it feel different, but also familiar. And so there's been a lot of choices in the development meetings of, well, does this fit, but does it expand? Are we just repeating the same things? Are we just taking, you know, fantasy tropes and putting them with a different stamp on them? And the answer always is no. I want to do it different. I want to take one step further. And so that's been one of the driving design choices as well, is we don't want to repeat something we've already done. We want to push the boundaries. We want to take it out there. By this time, the core team of Paizo had been formed. Those are the current creative directors of James Jacobs, our art creative director, Sarah Robinson, our executive team, Eric Mona, Jeff Alvarez, Lisa and Vic, of course, as our owners. They had been there for several years, and they had kind of weathered that bumpy transition piece. So we have a lot of knowledge. I used to say I was the newbie at my 3.5 years, but I'm not anymore. I kind of sit right in the middle of the experienced crew and the newer crew. And it's helped us in shaping this new one because that team has gone through it before. So while we've added people to each of the teams that's having to do this, our art director is the same one that laid out the original beta book. Jason is, he designed the first one, and he's leading the design team on the second one. So we have that continuity, which helps make some of the decisions easier, I think, because they've already weeded through a lot of options and made some of those choices. 2011 also saw us launch the beginner box. Before then, if you go back to the original box sets, they had tried to pull new players in, but as the years had passed, the box sets had become more rote, and it was more of a just sit down, play through, get a little bit of experience on your character, go. And so they wanted to return to the basics and see if someone unfamiliar to the hobby could open this box, read the rules, and play it without any GM involvement or any prior knowledge of a D20 system or of any tabletop role-playing system. And that drove a lot of the decision-making on what went into the Paizo beginner box. To the point they did some blind testing, and some of the things that they found out from that feedback was very enlightening, because we make some assumptions as longtime role players that our new players just don't see. And we're like, but come on, of course you know what these 6 stats are. You should know this. This is something that has been there forever. And it's like, but you know, if you've never sat down and discussed what charisma is, or what is the difference between wisdom and intelligence, it doesn't necessarily come intuitively. And so those were some of the things that when we made the beginner box we had to figure out, and we've taken, again, into how we are presenting our second edition, is if you don't know what these terms are, if you haven't played before, will you be able to read this and understand this? 2012 kind of got into the heyday of first edition. We were putting out our 3 hardback books, we had our campaign settings, we had our companions, everything was kind of going. Decided to launch a card game based on the role-playing game, because, you know, why not? I like to think of it as my beer and pretzels role-playing, because I can get all the story with about half the attention that I have to give an actual tabletop role-playing game. So I can sit there and chat with my friends and still have a role-playing experience. It sold off the shelves and spawned 3 more editions, and everything was just kind of chugging along. Things were good. 2013, 2014, those were the growth years for my particular part of the company, the Pathfinder Society. It had started in 2008 under 3.5 rules. The first season, season 0, was written all under 3.5. And then season 1 launched with the Pathfinder rule set. And it started with 13 venture captains. It is now up to 892 venture officers of all 4 ranks. And we started on 3 continents. We are now on 6. So it had some stability under the organized play coordinator, Mike Brock. He was there for almost 4 years and really gave it the impetus and the push it needed to get from a fledgling being into a full-on community base. And so we get into 2013, 2014. We're now longer published than any other edition. 5th edition has been announced. It's come out. People do play it. I've played it. And the commentary we get a lot is Pathfinder's too complex. I'm sure you've heard the term math finder. I'll embrace it. I'll own it. But we had gotten to that pile of books. And we had gotten to the level of, if you didn't know how everything worked in there, if you hadn't read the latest hardback book, you weren't going to have the most optimal characters. Our original iconics were feeling a little bit dated. Pathfinder Society launched the core campaign so that people could play more content, but go back and play those original iconics and the original character classes free of some of the additional pieces on there, and to give a simplified version of the game to many players. And that's when the internal powers that be started sitting there going, how long do we think we still have? What is the lifetime on first edition? Do we need to make the switch, and when do we need to make it? At the same time, one of the employees came in and said, you know, I wrote Distant Realms pieces, and we've kind of played with the tech in Numeria, and it got some reception, but it wasn't quite what everyone wanted. Not everyone wants lasers in their fantasy, and not everyone wants fantasy in their lasers. You know, it's that chocolate peanut butter problem. So what if we wrote a book that expanded those options and kind of went to the dark tapestry and out into space? And do you think we could do this? And it started as a book, and became a book, and became a book. And every time they kept saying, oh, we need to add this. And the next thing we know, it's the size of a core rule book, and it's its own entity. And we went, well, we're not really going to push this back into the Pathfinder family, are we? Okay, we need another name. What's it going to be? And decided that it would be Starfinder, because, you know, we're going to be the family of finders now. But so this, what was supposed to be a supplemental addition to Pathfinder, decided to be its entire own new game system. And it borrowed a lot from our Pathfinder, from what we knew, but there were some things we needed to change. We needed to change our armor class methods because, you know, when you're firing lasers, plate mail is just, plate is not going to work. It's not going to stop them. So we had to look at how we wanted to do that one. And the speed that we decided to put it out, because we had already kind of told our distribution models, hey, we've got these books coming up, meant that we didn't go to the public on it. We actually didn't have the playtest there. We kind of took it from internal, and we did internal testing, and we kind of talked to some other people, we got some feedback, but it didn't have the same robust, almost year-long playtest model that Pathfinder had had. And that we had used for many of the Pathfinder hardback rules books in those ensuing years. There's only one other hardback that I think didn't have that kind of playtest. And we brought out some classes with it, and again, same issue. They didn't quite have all the bugs worked out. We found out that by taking it out to our players and our fan base, we really got a better product. So Starfinder came out, sold like gangbusters. We had a lot of bored employees the fourth day of Gen Con because there was nothing in the booth left to sell in terms of Starfinder, which is a beautiful problem to have, but it meant that we also had an extra year that we could talk about what this second edition would look like and what did we want it to be, and oh yes, we need a play test, and oh yes, we want our feedback. And so we kind of adjusted a few schedules and decided that we were going to launch it this year with the final season of Pathfinder Society and the playtest at the same time. But some of those lessons that we had learned about community involvement and the growth that we had seen in the Pathfinder Society said, we need to make sure they're playing it too. So the organized play team, bless them, when I said, hey, I want to write some adventures in this playtest, they didn't tell me no. They said, sure, sounds good, let's do it. So for Gen Con, we were able to launch playtest adventures alongside our normal Pathfinder 1 adventures. And it helped bring even more people into the playtest because they were small 4-hour snippets that you could commit to instead of an 8-chapter book. And so we've been taking data from our regular society players via surveys. We've been taking data from our community via surveys. In fact, I apologize for survey overload for any of you whose fingers are worn out from typing to us. But we do appreciate it, and it is all read. And I'll tell you, every Wednesday we have a meeting on the editorial staff that talks about what our updates are and where we're going. And we're looking at that survey data every single Wednesday, saying, hey, what does this mean? What does it tell us? The other piece that came along with designing second edition was also we have to design a second edition organized play program for it. What we started 10 years ago in Pathfinder Society with paper chronicles and paper character sheets doesn't work in the digital age 11 years later. And so we are looking at a more digital model for it where you don't need to carry all this paper. I may have broken several backs lifting my suitcase in early travel period because I was carrying so much paper. So now we're leaning on our tech team saying, we have a reporting system, but we need it more robust. Can you do this? Can you do that? So when we look at in second edition, it's not just our creative teams, our design teams and our development teams. Our tech teams are involved. Our warehouse team is looking at the warehouse going, where are we putting a second stack of books? So they've been madly trying to reconfigure things and making space and deciding processes that will get your products to you faster. We're looking at distribution channels because 11 years ago, even 5 years ago, distribution looked different. Amazon wasn't necessarily as big as it was, and it didn't have the reach it did. So we've been looking at all sorts of different ways that we can leverage new companies and new technology to help us do our daily job so we can really do what we want to do and what we want to focus on, which is creating the best content we can for you. One of the things that a playtest allows us to do is to try things that we wouldn't necessarily put into print. And so remember when I said back when they became Pathfinder, they looked at how close they wanted to stay to the 3.5 tree and decided, yeah, we're going to stay closer than not. It tweaked a lot of things, but it still left some holes. And it's left some holes that our design team has looked at every year and said, is this the year? Not quite yet. Is this the year? Not quite yet. And so you see some of those changes that came out in the playtest. One of them being the resonance system. And you're laughing. How many of you have played the playtest at this point? Okay, a crew over here, a couple there. So when Pathfinder came out, they were trying to solve the issue of magic items. And the fact that you can only load so many magic items on a character before they overpower anything we can throw at them. You know, if you're blinged up from top to bottom, no matter how good that Tarrasque is or that dragon is, you're still going to cakewalk it. And so they came up with the slot system. All right, you can wear one belt, you can wear one set of armor, you can wear one cloak, you can wear a headband, you can have a hat with the headband on it, you can wear 2 rings. There's a problem with this theory. I'm wearing 3. If I want to double up, I could get 8, but I still can only activate 2 of them at a time, and I have to choose that. And so one of the things that the playtest looked at was, okay, well, if you can wear 8 rings and you want to wear 8 rings, why don't we let you wear 8 rings? But there has to be some kind of limiting factor, and that's where resonance came involved. Resonance is the idea that you use your magic to power through and power your magic items. And you only have so much of your soul that you can expend in this way before it just drains you and you can't control it and you go haywire and everything kind of shorts out and you just kind of, bzz yourself. So we put it out to the public and we said, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're moving away from slots and we're moving to this. And some people came out and went, oh, cool, I got my 8 rings. And some people went, oh, that's weird. Can't do it. No. It wouldn't be prudent, not going to go there. But there was also the problem that because we said magic items needed resonance, that led to potions and wands and scrolls, which are all magic items, needing you to give resonance to them. And so they said, okay, charisma is the stat that everyone associates with good looking or not so good looking. And that's about it. And most people go, I got some scars, don't need to be good looking, not too worried about it. Drop the charisma, beef up the constitution and the strength. Bring it on, I'm a fighter. But what that led to was charisma was the dump stat for a lot of classes, a lot of players. And then you go into the village and you're like, okay, I'm gonna talk to someone. What's your charisma? 6. You're gonna talk to them, really? Okay, let's see this. Let's have some role play. So they wanted to make charisma have that same relevancy as constitution, strength, dexterity. All of those had a game tie-in, but charisma really didn't. So that's what they based resonance off of. Your force of will, your force of personality is where you get your scores. But if you're trying to be a character that's effective, and especially a melee-based character that's effective, you can't dump your constitution, your strength, or your dexterity. So you're left not having a lot of charisma. So then when you go to use that potion, you go, I'm going to drink my... Oh, I don't have any bonus. I have no resonance. I can't drink my potion. That was some of the feedback we got during the playtest, was this doesn't work for us because this doesn't make sense. I'm a fighter and I can't drink my potion. Help. What are we going to do? So the design team went back, looked at it and said, oh, well, maybe magic items work, especially those single-use magic items, but they work better if you can put some of you into them. And that is one of the examples of where feedback from our community and from our playtest actually had the design team change something mid-stride, put out an errata and say, hey, why don't you try this one instead? They actually issued 6 errata during the playtest period between August and Christmas that said, these are all things that we would like you to try instead. Death and Dying was another one. They wanted to make it a little more, you can't fall down, get up, fall down, get up, fall down, get up. The yo-yo syndrome, that there's some consequences to getting hit, in the ribs with a massive Titan mauler. It's gonna leave a dent no matter how much healing you put at it. And they've gone through several cycles and several iterations of the death and dying rules as well. So these are some of the things that the playtest is not our final version. And I can say this because I used to have a cube by the designers. I was sitting there for about 5 months, and I got to listen to a lot of debates over numbers. I thought I liked math. Not so much. But it's really neat to hear the 4 of them, because they all kind of gather together and they start discussing things. And what do you think? And oh, but this person said over here. Oh, but this is the feedback. This is what the polls say. So I'm here in some way to say that your input mattered for those of you that have played it and played into it. What it will bring, we've still got 3 months to solidify everything and put it into a whole. And it will be what I think will be the best thing that we've pulled from your minds, from your play experiences, from the years and years and years of play experience of our staffers, and we will deliver that to you at Gen Con this year. But it has been an 11-year learning curve from those first magazines and the first APs and hey, let's try this. Oh, that didn't work. Let's not do that again. But let's try this. And the innovation that comes out of the office. So we still got a few minutes. I've rambled on a little longer than I intended. Sorry. Any questions? Things I can answer? Yeah.
So I've never played Pathfinder.
Okay.
I play in a play group that's very familiar with things like 5e, but we experiment with a lot of rule sets. What can I say to my group to want them to try and do Pathfinder 2nd edition when that happens?
Okay, so the question was, can you tell your group, how can you convince them to join and try out?
What's the
What's the pitch? What's my elevator pitch? I got 30 seconds from first to 18th floor. The big one is it's got a breadth of choice to it that was present in 1 that is still going to be present in 2 that we have not found in many other systems. Many other systems have looked to be more modular, especially in recent years, and this will allow the customization and the tweaking. Part of that comes down to the change in the ABCs. We do not have races anymore. We have ancestries. The idea is, 1, race is a charged word that we would like to get away from. I hate for my real life to get into my fantasy life, but the reality is it will. And it does, and we want to make some changes. So that means we no longer have half-elves, half-orcs, half-lings, half-anythings. What you have is a selection of race feats that you are able to put on your character that say, 5 generations ago, some orc crept into the family bloodline. So now I got tusks. Aren't they cute? So those kind of little changes. We also have a background. What did you do between birth and deciding to be an adventurer? Were you a farmer? Were you a criminal? Were you a Pathfinder hopeful? So these are just little itty-bitty things that when you add them up allow you to customize a character in ways that I don't think are out there on the market right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes?
So Starfinder has one of my favorite takes on fantasy spellcasting, the undercasting thing.
Okay.
Is there any change to spellcasting and particularly for the playtest product? Because I think right now it's like way too restricted that you have to have like a spell prep at a level, and that locks the power.
I have heard rumor that they are opening that up. I do not have first-hand knowledge of it, but I will say that I've been out of the office since December 11th, and a lot of things are changing. But that was one of the feedback pieces that came in, was that especially like the sorcerer had been so confined, and they were looking for ways to bring them back out and give them more breadth. Yes?
Something's been kind of bugging me for a while now has been the playtest period for Pathfinder playtests. It still is always felt to me for a while now. You look at, 5e had a solid almost a year and a half, almost 2 years of playtest community next. The original Pathfinder had Pathfinder beta, as you said, we were just saying, it was like a year-long playtest. But we only got 5 months for the 2nd edition playtest. And I was wondering, what was the decision process
Okay, so the question is, why did we decide on a 5-month playtest versus our original March through to Gen Con playtest for one? A lot of that comes down to we don't have a major corporation behind us. And so to give us a chance to playtest without straining things too much, we need a Gen Con launch. It is the biggest show that we go to as a company. Our second biggest one is PaizoCon. So we really need to have it ready there. If you back up the dates from that launch, our printing deadlines are in March. So there's just not a lot we can do around it. We had been doing internal playtests for over a year prior to releasing it out. So we have that year and a half. It's just the public is only seeing that 5-6 month piece of it from Gen Con into December. Yes, up here.
I have a comment and a question.
Okay.
Number one, I've played other editions and getting online, like Archives of Nephis and the D20 PFSRD page. Those are like the best things that you guys have compared to D&D.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. I still buy the book. My question is, can you say anything regarding how they're doing like class balancing? Because right now, P1 has 50 different classes you can play, and some of them from our playtest, we haven't done the playtest, but we've been doing campaigns since like 2010. Some classes are ridiculously overpowered compared to some others. Is there any balance in there?
The question is, do we have any balance in our classes and how we're looking at them for 2? Yes. There are some people that are still going to call a Marshall Caster disparity on us, no matter how much we sit and crunch the numbers. But the idea is that each class will have something they're really good at, some things they're kind of good at, and some things that they really shouldn't attempt unless they're in the most dire circumstances. So they are looking at that one. Yes.
What are you most excited about with 2.0 personally?
Personally, what's my favorite thing about 2.0? 3-action economy, if you're talking mechanics, and society, if you're talking, we're wrapping up our storyline for the first season, and I am stoked. I can't wait. I've got to sit on it for about 3 more months before I can start talking and teasing things, but I'm really excited where we're going with it. Yeah.
Is there any balance in the production schedule for the APs and the splat books? So example, Iron Fang Legion came out, which is very wilderness-based, and then 9 months later, Ultimate Wilderness came out, and other books for that. So they didn't kind of like mesh. So if you had, I think Strange Aeons came out, and then I think after that, the Cult, something like that.
So the question is how we balance our production schedule between our different lines and our adventure paths. I'd tell you, but I'd have to gas the whole room. Our production schedules are changing. We are still committed to producing adventure paths. We are still going to produce content, but it is going to be in a slightly different format. But that is not my secret to tell. That comes from higher up. So you'll have to wait and watch some podcasts and things with Eric as our publisher. Yeah. I'll come over here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You don't have the load problem as much. You don't have that sort of effects. Yep. But on the flip side, you also have the junkies like me who I buy a player campaign every month, and I had a subscription for the longest time. Well, in second edition, we see kind of balance between those two rates. The question is our production schedule Starfinder versus our production schedule of Pathfinder, especially how it goes into Pathfinder 2. If I tell you the team for Starfinder is 5 people deep, not including editors and our art department, but just the developers that work on it, and our department for Pathfinder/Pathfinder 2 is 10 to 12 deep. We just have a lot more resources allocated to getting 2 out the door right now. We always strive to find that middle ground between selling our books, not flooding the market, giving the players their options, not overwhelming our staff. And it's like this really big cross that we're constantly trying to plot the point on to make sure we can hit it on the nose just as much as we can. So there's been a lot of consideration from the executives on down onto what our production schedule looks like. And as we start releasing more of that information, I think you'll see we're trying to hit that balance.
Over here, Pathfinder has come from a base of house rules and developed into its own system. And with Pathfinder and Starfinder doing a general sort of play test system whenever they release new content, like Pathfinder 2, is there a system that DMs can comment on their own personal house rules, either inside of the beta or outside of the beta, and that filters into how the developers view the systems as a whole?
How can you get GM house rules into our eyes and kind of into the system itself? Paizo.com has a very robust message board family, and we have different boards for every single thing that we produce. I highly recommend posting there, because even if you don't see the staffers posting, we're reading them, and we kind of take it in and all that feedback in, even if we're not in an active testing or an active soliciting feedback style. So we're always watching and listening and trying to incorporate it. Yes?
Yes, so are you going to completely phase out version 1.0, totally cut it off?
Are we phasing out 1.0? No. We have said that we will keep the soft-bound pocket editions for our core rule books and for all of the hardback books that we published in stock, as long as people want to buy them. Pathfinder Society will support one in that you can schedule games and use it towards your con numbers until your area is ready to be done with it. So what we really want is a soft transfer, not a...
The point I made was that, you made the analogy that, the stack is getting high. Well, I bought into that stack. My stack is probably nearly as the hand level. I'm not sure I want to start over.
Understandable. We hear that. From a compatibility standpoint, the fluff, all of the world setting, all of the campaign setting that we put into it is still valid. There will be changes in the world. One of the things we're doing is advancing the timeline and setting some of the adventure path results as canon, as what we write from. So if you've played certain adventure paths, a world wound may have closed, a queen or a king may have been deposed, there may be new kingdoms over here, a tyrant might be escaping, but those will come into the storyline. However, all of the back history is still very valid, and you can set your games wherever you want to. We won't reprint at this time. We are saying we won't reprint the smaller books just because of the expenditures of that kind of print run, but we do still have many of them, and the PDFs will always be available. We are not taking the PDFs down, so they will still be available on our site, and if you've purchased them in your accounts. Yeah, I think we're about 5 minutes.
I do have one quick question. From my study of the playtest, it seems to run very much like a rudimentary programming language, which may be very good for digital content video games. Is that in the works?
Do we have digital content and/or video games in the works for it? We have discussions going on with a lot of potential licensees. In fact, we have one staffer that is just dedicated to licensing and our relationships with our other partners. So watch this space. That's the best I can say. What is our plan to bring in feedback from Starfinder, since we didn't have an active playtest of it? Well, we just launched a playtest for the 3 new classes because we realized that that was something we wanted to do. And I would expect, though I don't know for sure because it's not somewhere I've actually talked to that team, is that when we have to reprint the core rule books, we will probably see some updates like we did with the Pathfinder core rule book. But that is speculation on my part because I have not talked to Owen as a design lead. All right, last question.
With all the resources that are available online, just things like the SRDs and stuff like that, how do you feel that that has expanded the player base? Do you feel that they're not an essential part, but a good, something good for the Pathfinder?
How do we feel about the online resources like the SRD? I love them. I am of the opinion that I don't want to make, especially people that don't have the income to buy the books as readily, make a choice between their food and their hobby. That just sets wrong in my heart. So I would rather people are using those and playing than not playing at all and getting that exposure. Because in the end, the more the tabletop industry grows, no matter what version you're playing, the better it is for all of us, because it allows us to have the diversity and choice in that setting. You know, we're all ice cream. Let's go with different flavors. Come on. I will eat any ice cream any day. So with that, I think we are out of time. I will be in the organized playroom, which is upstairs in the... Keep going up, just keep going up, keep going up. Follow the signs for the tabletop RPGs. I'm up there for the rest of the weekend. If you had other questions you wanted to ask and didn't get to, or just stop by to say hi, play a game, we've still got spots. Otherwise, thank you very much. Happy role-playing.